Imagine this. You're standing in front of a mirror. Not the usual kind, but one that doesn't reflect your image back to you. Instead, it shows everything you've ever tried to become. Every version of yourself you've constructed, one layered on top of another like armor. The overachiever, the self-improvement addict, the perfect parent, the confident leader, the mindful one who reads the right books, speaks the right words, meditates for 15 minutes a day, and posts inspiring quotes like digital mantras. Now imagine that one by one, these versions begin to flicker and disappear. What's left staring back at you isn't a better version of yourself. It's something raw, unfinished, perhaps even ugly. And for a moment, you don't recognize it. You wonder, is this who I truly am? Or have I been lying to myself all along? This is the silent crisis of our time. You've been told your job is to become your best self, that if you optimize enough, hustle hard enough, align your chakras correctly, and clear your inner child's trauma by Thursday, you'll finally arrive. The promise is seductive. Clarity, confidence, fulfillment, a self so whole and polished that suffering becomes obsolete. But beneath that promise hides a terrifying paradox. What if the very pursuit of your best self is exactly what's keeping you fragmented? What if everything you're striving for, control, perfection, high performance, emotional mastery, isn't a path to liberation, but a beautifully disguised prison, a trap that wears the face of growth but secretly feeds on your self-rejection? Ask yourself honestly, why do you want to become your best self? Who taught you what that even means? And what happens to all the parts of you that don't fit into that ideal? There's a reason the more you chase this version of yourself, the more exhausted you feel. A reason your anxiety spikes even as you level up. A reason that despite your progress, you feel fake when the world is silent and the mirror is honest. Because maybe what you call your best self isn't you. Maybe it's who you became to be accepted. Maybe it's a performance refined by trauma, not truth. A curated persona that says all the right things while quietly suffocating what's real. And if that's true, if your highest aspiration is based on a lie, then what happens when you finally become it? Who do you lose? This is not a motivational story. This is an excavation. Not of who you're trying to become, but of who you were forced to bury. Because the real question isn't how to become your best self. The real question is far more unsettling. Who would you be if you stopped trying to become anything at all?
Behind the myth of your best self lies an ancient wound, one you didn't choose but inherited. Not from genetics, but from culture, from silence. From the masked faces of those who raised you, taught you, and loved you in the only way they knew how, conditionally. At some point, early on, you received the message, not directly, but through glances, corrections, and withheld warmth, that certain parts of you were unacceptable. Maybe it was your sadness, your wildness, your defiance, your sensitivity. Maybe it was your need for attention or your confusion about who you were. Whatever it was, it didn't fit the mold of who you were supposed to be. So you did what every intelligent, emotionally adaptive child does. You cut it off. You hid it. You performed. Carl Jung called these cut-off fragments the shadow, not because they are evil, but because they are unseen, repressed, banished to the unconscious because they threatened your belonging. And once buried, you began to build the version of yourself you hoped would be accepted. This was the beginning of the best self. But this self, as Jean-Paul Sartre would say, is bad faith, a performance that denies one's true freedom by clinging to identity. You became the good student, the funny one, the ambitious one, the spiritual seeker, all while slowly disconnecting from the terrifying yet authentic parts of you that didn't fit into that narrative. The lie is subtle, almost beautiful in its deception. Society reinforces it everywhere, from corporate branding campaigns to self-help books, from curated Instagram personas to therapy culture that promises integration, yet subtly pressures transformation. Even the language is revealing. Self-improvement, becoming your best, leveling up. Implicit in all of it is this: you're not enough yet. Keep going. Try harder. Fix more. And so you keep running. Not towards authenticity, but away from the very parts of you that make you whole. Schopenhauer warned us about this internal division. He wrote of the will to live, an insatiable, often unconscious drive that leads to suffering when misunderstood. You don't chase your best self because it makes you free. You chase it because you're terrified of sitting still long enough to confront the self beneath all the layers. The one who doesn't know, doesn't shine, doesn't win. And that terror is real, because when you stop performing, something strange begins to happen. Your metrics dissolve. Your borrowed maps disintegrate. You're left with silence, with chaos, with all the messy contradictions that don't fit into an identity optimized for approval. But here's the deeper psychological twist. Your best self isn't just about looking good or succeeding. It's become your armor, the container that holds your life together. If you abandon it, you fear collapse, not just of your image, but of your meaning, of yourself. This is the hidden mechanism that drives so many to spiritual bypassing, perfectionism, and burnout. Not laziness, not weakness, but the fear of facing the fractured, unpolished truth of who they are without the mask. And yet, this is the exact threshold all true transformation passes through. The collapse of the false self is not a failure. It is the beginning. Still, the lie persists, stronger than ever, because the alternative is terrifying. What if everything you're striving to become is not the path home, but the very thing keeping you from it?
You may not realize it, but the pursuit of your best self has consequences far beyond the surface. Not just personal frustration or existential fatigue, but a deep, subtle distortion of how you live, love, and see the world. Because once you adopt the belief that you are not yet enough, that you must earn your worth through refinement and effort, every moment becomes a test. Every emotion becomes data to optimize. Every flaw becomes a target. Life itself turns into a project, and you, a product in perpetual beta. This isn't growth. It's self-abandonment disguised as ambition. The brain, wired for pattern recognition and social belonging, quickly adapts to this performance. Neuroscience tells us that identity is not static. It's constructed by repeated thought, behavior, and social feedback. The more you perform your best self, the more your brain believes it's real. This is an integration. It's a trance. You become fluent in your persona. You know when to smile, when to sound enlightened, when to feign vulnerability just enough to seem authentic. You can speak the language of self-awareness without ever truly experiencing it. It's all very polished, very smooth. But inside you begin to feel hollow. because you know, deep down, that the person you've built is standing on a fracture. Over time, this inner split creates cognitive dissonance, a psychological tension between who you are and who you pretend to be. And it manifests in subtle, corrosive ways. Imposter syndrome. Not because you're incompetent, but because you're succeeding as someone you are not. Chronic anxiety. Not from chaos, but from suppressing your wild, uncontained parts. Burnout, not from overworking, but from constantly resisting your own natural rhythms. Loneliness, not because people don't love you, but because they can't see you. In this fractured state, relationships suffer. Intimacy becomes performance art. You show up as the version of yourself you think others want. Agreeable, empowered, always evolving. But vulnerability feels dangerous. After all, if people fall in love with your best self, what happens when your broken parts inevitably emerge? You don't just fear rejection. You expect it. Because you've rejected yourself first. Even more dangerously, this pathology doesn't stay private. It metastasizes into culture. We live in a world where curated selfhood is rewarded. Social media reinforces the illusion with algorithms that prize polish over presence. Therapy speak is co-opted into branding. Shadow work becomes a TikTok trend. Authenticity becomes a commodity. And here's the final twist. The very systems that sell you self-improvement are built on your quiet desperation. A desperate person buys more books, signs up for more courses, consumes more content. The market doesn't want you healed. It wants you hooked. So the best self becomes a treadmill with no exit. You're not healing, you're chasing. You're not becoming whole, you're editing yourself into palatability. And perhaps the most devastating consequence of all? You stop dreaming from the soul, because your goals are no longer born from desire, but from inadequacy. You begin living someone else's blueprint, measuring your worth with someone else's metrics, hating the very mess that makes you human. This is the cost of the lie. And unless you pause, unless you dare to question the ideal you've been striving for, you will spend your life perfecting a version of yourself you were never meant to be. But what happens when you finally rebel?
It begins not with a breakthrough, but a breakdown. One day, you simply can't pretend anymore. You sit on the floor, maybe metaphorically, maybe literally, and realize that everything you've built, everything you've improved, optimized, and polished feels foreign, empty. You've reached the summit of a self you no longer recognize. This is not failure. This is rebellion. Not loud, not violent, quiet, subversive, the kind that begins inside and ripples outward. It starts with a radical act. You stop trying, not out of apathy, but from clarity. You stop contorting yourself into the shape of someone worth loving. You stop setting goals that are rooted in shame. You stop performing healing. And in that stopping, something ancient stirs beneath the rubble. Your real self has been waiting. Not the one they sold you, the sovereign self. The unoptimized, messy, beautiful paradox of a being that doesn't need to be better, just whole. This is not about destroying your ambition or dismantling discipline. This is about reclaiming your authority. Because until now, you've been living under tyranny, the tyranny of the ideal. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, the process of becoming whole, not by perfecting yourself, but by integrating your shadow. That means not just acknowledging the parts of you that feel unworthy, angry, or ashamed, but inviting them in, giving them a seat at the table, listening to them. Real growth isn't addition, it's inclusion. And yes, it will feel like chaos at first. When you stop suppressing your truth, it floods back in. The child you abandoned, the rage you silenced, the softness you hardened. They all return, not to punish you, but to make you real again. Nietzsche once wrote, "You must still have chaos in yourself to give birth to a dancing star." He wasn't talking about destruction. He was talking about depth, about shedding illusions to uncover what is elemental. So, how do you break free? You refuse the script. You stop measuring your progress by external validation. You stop building a life that looks good and start building one that feels true. You slow down. You listen more than you speak. You become suspicious of any voice that demands you be better instead of truer. And then you do the most terrifying thing imaginable. You let go of becoming. You learn to be. Not the kind of being sold on wellness retreats or minimalist Instagram feeds, but real grounded being. Sitting with your fear without fixing it. Speaking without rehearsing. Crying without apologizing. Laughing without filtering. You practice not knowing. You make room for contradiction. You get intimate with silence. You trade performance for presence, certainty for surrender, self-improvement for self-remembrance. Because the most rebellious act in a world obsessed with bettering yourself is to accept yourself as you are. Not as a finished product, not as a spiritual idea, but as a living, breathing contradiction that can hold grief and joy in the same breath. And from that place, something new is born, not a best self, but a true self, the one that doesn't need to prove, doesn't need to win, doesn't even need to be seen, just to exist, fully, fiercely, freely. You will scare people, you will confuse them, but you will also attract something rare, resonance. Because people don't really fall in love with your achievements. They fall in love with your aliveness.
There comes a moment, after the rebellion, after the letting go, when everything goes quiet. Not the numbing kind of silence, but the sacred kind. The kind that holds something ancient, something you forgot. You wake up one morning and realize nothing outside of you has changed. The sky still hangs heavy, the news still screams, the world still spins in chaos, but you are no longer chasing, no longer splitting yourself between the person you are and the person you believe you should be. And in that stillness, you uncover the truth that was always waiting in the background, like a patient witness. There is no best self. There never was. That phrase was always a mask for something much more subtle and dangerous, the fear of being unlovable as you are. What you thought was a noble aspiration was often a disguise, a strategy to hide your wounds, to justify your existence, to make your pain palatable. But pain doesn't need polish, and you don't need permission. Your desire to become better was never the problem. Growth is sacred. Change is real. But growth without grounding leads to collapse. When rooted in shame, even evolution becomes a form of self-erasure. You thought you were becoming enlightened. But enlightenment is not a higher version of you. It is the return to the part you exiled, the one who wept in secret, the one who didn't perform, the one who dared to feel. The deepest realization is this: you are not a project to fix. You are not a character to refine. You are a living paradox, both light and shadow, both clarity and confusion, both sacred and shattered. You are not here to win at life. You're here to live it. And real living begins the moment you stop editing yourself for consumption. The world doesn't need your curated perfection. It needs your honesty, your trembling hands, your unfiltered voice. You don't need to speak in affirmations. You need to speak in truth. You don't need to master your emotions. You need to feel them wildly, unapologetically, without translation. You don't need to heal every wound. You need to stop pretending you weren't hurt in the first place. Because here's the secret. The you that you've been avoiding, the one you thought you had to improve, is the only one who can ever be free. Freedom isn't found in control. Freedom is the collapse of control, the death of the ideal. The moment you exhale and say, I am enough, even if I never become more than this. And from that place, life doesn't need to be earned. It simply unfolds. Not every day will be profound, not every moment will be cinematic, but you will be here. No longer running, no longer pretending, no longer living someone else's idea of who you should be. And in that ordinary presence lies the extraordinary. A person who isn't trying to be good or great or best, just real. And that, in a world drunk on performance, is revolutionary. So here's the final question, whispered not by your mind, but by something deeper. If you stopped performing today, who would remain? Would you grieve that person? Or would you finally be home? Because maybe, just maybe, the self you've been searching for isn't ahead of you. Maybe it's the one who's been quietly waiting behind the mask, the one you silenced long ago. And now it doesn't want to be better. It just wants to be held by you. That's not the end of your journey. That's where it truly begins.